Good morning. How's everyone doing? Fantastic. So I have the distinct honor today of sort of following up after yesterday's sessions. How incredible was that? Keith's amazing keynote, and then we had Dr. Walensky's talk, and then that incredibly inspiring talk from Travis Mills. It just sort of puts things in perspective, doesn't it? So you heard a lot from Keith today about sort of the incredibly transformative impact that data is having now. So we're going to take a look today under the hood here at Inovalon of how we actually deal with that data and AI transformation, and then some of the exciting applications that we're building leveraging AI at the core. Okay, so Keith reminded us yesterday of these mind-boggling numbers around sort of the expansion of compute power and AI and data. So let me do a quick poll. How many of you are wearing one of these trackable health devices on you at some point? There you go. There's quite a bit of it. I wear one of these Ring devices. This thing is monitoring my sleep, my body temperature, my resting heart rate, et cetera, right? And that helps me stay abreast of sort of my health and sort of keeps me aware of there's something that I should be aware of coming up. So the reality is I'm not the only one. So according to the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, 30% of adults now in the United States are wearing one of these things. So guess what that's doing, right? There's a lot of new data that's being created. It's all of that compute power now basically in one finger in my hand. Additionally, 80% of those adults are now sharing their data with their providers. So again, that's new data that's now coming in to kind of be able to help with monitoring the patient's health. So we have all of this incredible data, more than we've ever had before. We probably have more data flowing in every minute now than we had at the same time maybe 3 months ago. That's just kind of the nature of the data that Keith showed us yesterday, right? So it's really important to realize that, you know, despite this massive size, and maybe partly because of it, it actually makes our job more challenging. We're in the business of trying to sort of leverage data to make patient outcomes better. But let's talk about how we have to deal with this challenge of our data just growing at such insanely large rates, and how do we actually manage to keep up with it? Because we've got to really do the work to bring all of that data together, keep it unified. Because in healthcare, the patient is really at the center of everything that we do. Our goal is to get as comprehensive a picture of that patient as we can. So you've got all of these disparate sort of streams of data coming in, right? And a lot of them are kind of siloed. So you have EHR data, you've got insurance claims data, you've got data from devices like this, you've got lab results data, you've got prescriptions data. It just keeps going. So we'll actually end up with an even more fragmented view of the patient if we don't actually do something to kind of bring all of that together. So this is one of the things that makes Inovalon really unique. So we maintain the largest longitudinally linked primary source healthcare data set in the United States. This is what we call the More² registry. So as you can tell, this is an incredibly massive data set, and that's basically how we actually drive value to our customers, and therefore to our patients. Right? This is the data that's kind of allowing us to build our applications and then infusing those applications, the data that makes those applications better. And as those applications get better, there's more data that flows into the application, which in turn makes the application better again. So you have this sort of wonderful flywheel of goodness that's happening with data and the applications around it. Okay, not all data is really created equal, right? So because when we think about all of this data, we talked about the challenges of dealing with large amounts of data. So when we think about the fact that this data is going to be used to make decisions about patient outcomes, we have to be a little bit more opinionated about what data is more interesting, what data is less interesting than others. So at Inovalon, we spend a lot of time talking about the primary source nature of data. So we all know how complex the healthcare ecosystem is, right? There's just so many different points of interaction between all of the various entities involved, like from when a patient interacts with the provider to get care, to when that data flows over to a system where that's being used to garner insights about that patient and help improve the outcome for that patient. So having that data sort of travel in a relatively pristine way actually makes that data really valuable when you're kind of helping determine those insights for that patient. So the primary source data is data that's basically coming through from, we talked about devices and clinical encounters and EHR systems, right? That data, if it's not touched or altered in that transition as it's kind of getting to the system that's going to do its analysis, tends to be more dependable, it's more precise, so you can actually kind of drive more trustworthy decision making. So compare that to other data types, right? Think of, say, aggregated or summarized data or data that's been through a whole bunch of transformations before it's gotten to the point where it's being used for analysis. So this data will tend to become outdated, right? There might have been some methodology that was used to sort of analyze the data that kind of changed its nature, and now the value of that data for the system that's kind of building models around it, for example, is limited. And you may end up actually biasing towards wrong decision making because of the quality of the data. So it's really important to kind of think about your sources of data. Now, sometimes it may not be completely avoidable to have data that's not primary source, but this is a pretty fundamental premise that we kind of build our applications around, which is the data needs to be as pristine as possible. That's why we kind of focus on the primary source nature of data. Okay, so all of these, the systems, the technologies, the process, everything that sort of like is involved in sort of bringing the data in and then sort of managing all of that data is what we refer to as the Inovalon One platform. So let's start with what we think of as effectively air, food, and water for the Inovalon One platform. That's basically security, privacy, and data governance. Right? It's like there's hardly a day that goes by where I don't see news about some data breach that's happened or find out about some disclosure of risks, et cetera. Right? It's really hard to not be alarmed when sort of patient data is involved in these kinds of situations. So these are things that we just absolutely obsess over. So security is job one, and it has to be. So we have to ensure that the strictest of security protocols are being used. We have to ensure that multi-factor authentication, requiring more than one factor for you to use our applications, is just the default. Right? We have to ensure that there's really rigorous access control mechanisms across our application portfolio. You can only do the things that you're allowed to do and absolutely nothing more. So you have this principle of least privilege that's in place. We have to encrypt the data that's both in transit and in rest. So security is job one. It just never ends. It just has to be baked into everything we go do. The next is privacy. Right? Again, really fundamental to any healthcare use case. How do we actually deliver the value without sort of compromising the privacy of our patients? So this is a key requirement of how we go build the Inovalon One platform. The data in the More² registry is statistically and certifiably de-identified. Then finally, we've got around it, a robust sort of audit and compliance regime to keep things all in track. So really, security, privacy, and governance is kind of like core to us. It's the kernel of this platform. Kind of has to be. OK, let's take a look under the covers of what's going on inside this platform. So as we mentioned, we've got data coming in from all of these various sources. And obviously, it's going to take different shapes and forms. There's data that shows up through API calls. There's data that shows up through flat files. There's data that will show up in real time, data that shows up asynchronously. There's all forms and all sorts of data. So, so as this data comes in, there's a series of processes that the data goes through as it moves into the Inovalon One platform. The first step is what we call data cleansing or data scrubbing. And this is the notion of actually making sure that if there's any inaccuracies in the data, inconsistent information, duplicate data, all of that is kind of getting addressed. So you're really sort of cleaning and scrubbing the data to make it ready for being used in applications down the pipe. So the next step in this process is the process of standardization or data normalization. Because obviously, it's coming in from all of these various sources. It's going to be formatted differently. It's going to follow different schemas, and so forth. So it's really important for us to kind of normalize all of that data, canonicalize it into something that we can use in a consistent way, regardless of the application that's using that data. So that way, we can kind of use data that came in through one interaction and then leverage it for other useful interactions in the ecosystem in a manner that you can compare and contrast the data in a consistent way. And finally, the process of data de-identification. So after this data has been normalized, this goes through the data de-identification process. This is a statistical or a scientific process that makes sure that the data is de-identified, so patient privacy is preserved as we kind of take it through the pipeline. So now that we've got the data in all of these various forms now in the platform, it's now ready to be consumed. And boy, there's just so many different ways that data can get consumed using the Inovalon applications. So one of those ways is through accessing our data applications. So speaking of our data applications, I hope you all had a chance to take a look at some of the demos that we've had outside of the last day and a half of the Inovalon application portal. This is really exciting. This is something that brings together all of the Inovalon applications into one centralized user experience. It's effectively a gateway to the Inovalon application portfolio. You can use a single login, and that securely and seamlessly connects you and streamlines your workflow as you flow across these applications. So all of the application that you're provisioned to, you can use. You can see all of the other applications in the Inovalon portfolio, so you can kind of start looking at here's what the possibilities are. We're not done. As you can imagine, this is a continuing, evolving process, and there's just a lot more coming in this space. So keep your eye out on this. So because every application at Inovalon is a data application, it's about really using the data in as meaningful a way as possible, and that's kind of the focus of the Inovalon application portal. So let's go look at one of those applications. Now, this is a quick look at the portal. You can see that you can actually go look at all of the applications. You can scroll through, find out other applications that you may not be using. You can then select some of these applications and favorite them, so you can go bookmark them effectively for future use and so forth. So here's another application. This is the converged analytics application. This is easily navigatable from the Inovalon app portal. And the analytics application takes data that's coming in, computes gaps in care, and then it sort of creates outreach to patients based on an intervention plan that has been created. It then collates all of the data from those interventions, brings it back together and surfaces it in dashboards. So you can see the data is sort of going through a series of state changes as these transitions happen, and the application allows you to go see how that looks like in these various dashboards. In addition, because we have a common data platform underlying all of these transitions, that data can then be made available to our customers in the form of their own data lakes. Right? We can make a data lake available for our customers to go build their own views and dashboards, et cetera. So all of this said, perhaps the most interesting thing of use of this data, though, is in the AI models that can actually go enable rich insights and use cases across our application. So let's talk about some of these really exciting new applications. So I want to start with medical record review. Last year, I demonstrated the idea of using sort of natural language processing bolstered with additional scaffolding that's informed by our clinical expertise to simplify and streamline the process of medical record review for risk adjustment. So I'm thrilled to announce a brand new application, the Inovalon Converged Record Review, based on this concept. So this is an AI-powered application that analyzes a medical record, performing natural language processing on it, and then applies scaffolding, the sort of expertise-driven scaffolding, in order to do what we think of as smarter condition recognition. So the user interface allows the reviewer to kind of like go make final decisions based on what's being recommended by this combination of natural language processing and the scaffolding on top of it. Let's take a look. The core of the Converged Record Review application is this notion of a project. So as a customer, you can go select a set of medical records. The source of those records could be anything, including our own converged electronic records on demand application. You then go select what risk model you want. You make a few other sort of configuration decisions, and then you've set up your converged record review project. You can then go and look at the reviewers that are available, and you can kind of decide who are your reviewers, what permissions they have, and so forth. And then you can actually go look at the actual records in that project. You can go choose to go decide which reviewer does which medical record by just going and doing a filter for, go look for a certain condition code. And then for that set of condition codes, assign it to a certain reviewer or a reviewer group, so you can kind of manage your workforce appropriately. And that's kind of the idea of sort of like administrating how you're actually doing the record review process. Now let's take a look at what this experience looks like for the actual reviewer when they get in. So when they actually load the chart, you can see that this is already annotated with information from the AI. There's two conditions you're seeing highlighted here. One in blue is highlighted as positively identified as a condition in the record. The other one, which is in yellow, is in yellow because it's actually a weakly suggested condition. We're not quite sure. In fact, if you read the text, there's actually a negation. So you probably don't want to consider it a condition for this risk adjustment. So you take this data, you go create an encounter out of it. You specify things like, yes, I've seen that there's a patient signature on it. You then specify the diagnosis code that you as a reviewer are confirming does exist on the record, and you're saving it. Right? So you've now performed a review of a medical record that usually would have taken you hours to have done without this technology. There's a couple of things that are important to highlight in what we just saw. One, the fact that the AI detected something as a weakly asserted condition. It's basically suggesting you don't use it. This is really important because AI tend to have a bias towards sort of false positives. It's really important in this business to not have false positives. The other one, and I think this is even more interesting, is the fact that you can see that essential hypertension actually shows up on the record, on the medical record, but it's actually not highlighted, and there's a reason. This project was a Medicare project, and essential hypertension does not qualify as a risk-adjustable condition for Medicare. So the AI and the scaffolding around it is smart enough to have figured that out. And this is really, again, back to where the expertise comes in. The fact that this is not a supported condition is something that our experts have built into the scaffolding that's governing this. So obviously, huge value for risk adjustment here. But you can tell that the core of this can be useful for reviewing quality as well. So this is something that we've been working hard on. What you're really seeing here is a screen of like what the quality abstractor goes sees. So what are abstractors doing for quality? They're looking for measure numerator events or exclusionary events. Right? In this case, they're looking for colorectal cancer, whether there's an indicator of a colorectal cancer screening. And if there is, then it would make the numerator for the measure. Or an exclusionary condition, if there is an indicator of actual colorectal cancer or palliative care, et cetera, which would basically represent it as a exclusionary condition. So in the risk version, you saw that it's actually smart enough to not even show records that don't have conditions. In the quality case, the abstractor does have to go look at every record. But it's still actually helping automate their work significantly, because what it's doing, it's pre-identifying for the abstractor the events that are in the record. So you can see there in teal and blue that it's already marked off that it's seen these colonoscopy conditions or events in the record. So they can click on it and get to that particular point in the record and confirm that it exists. And once they've confirmed it, they then manually enter the fact that it exists, effectively recording the fact that they have seen evidence of this for the measure. And again, the point that they're actually entering it separately than the AI auto-entering it for them is kind of back to that point of the AI as a co-pilot, not an autopilot. It's kind of the notion of a human in the loop. I think of it as a human at the helm. It's still a human that's kind of doing the final decision-making on this, but the AI has significantly helped them in that process. Okay? So we've looked at applications of AI through a clinical lens. Let's kind of look at sort of more operational use cases. And specifically, let's look at revenue cycle management for providers. So I spoke about this last year where we've been spending a huge amount of focus around how do we simplify the front end of the revenue cycle management process. So this is the experience where the patient walks into the doctor's facility, and the time it takes from that point to when they actually get to care. That time is the process of them kind of getting all of the data together for them to go conduct the appropriate eligibility verification, et cetera, and getting back confirmation before they can get to care. It also turns out that, according to our surveys, 30% of healthcare professionals think of claims denials as kind of their biggest challenge in the revenue cycle management process. So we've had a huge focus on how do we actually make this problem go away for our customers. So we've invested in models to optimize the eligibility verification process. So a new product, Eligibility Verification Pro, ensures that eligibility and benefit information that's required gets back coverage information when sent. And the way it's doing it is there's two levels of this validation. At first, it goes and checks the integrity of a request. And if the request doesn't have required fields that are absolutely required and we don't know anything about, or if there's a formatting issue, et cetera, most of these are going to cause what we call member not found errors. Instead of sending that all the way over to the payer, we basically send it back to the provider to go fix it. So that's effectively a core integrity check. Beyond that, though, we then send that request to an enrichment process. The enrichment process can then go use our AI models, which of course is built on the More² registry, to then go say, I think I know what needs to get added into this request to make this request have a much higher likelihood of success. So let's see this in action. So here's an EV Pro request. You can see in this example, there's a request that has information about the payer. It has information about the provider. And then in terms of the information about the patient for whom the information is being sought, we have their first name and we have their last name. But not all patients are necessarily going to remember things like what is their identity, their member ID, et cetera. So in this case, the customer is just going to try with what data we have. You can see that the system determines that it can actually go infer the member ID from our AI model, fills that in, and then sends a request along, which in turn results in us having a successful coverage result back from the payer. So again, a huge benefit in optimizing the business process here and actually getting the patient quickly to the care part of their journey. And so let's take a look further ahead. This is something that we have sort of in the hopper, as it were. So we already talked about sort of addressing significant gaps in the front end of our revenue cycle. We're kind of thinking about the same challenges on the back end of our revenue cycle management. How do we go look at claims that are being sent? Now, it's reported that almost 90% of claims that are denied are actually preventable. Most of them turn out to be because of things like billing code errors or inconsistencies in the patient data that's provided. Or there are specific payer rules for that particular payer that may not have been adhered to. These are things that we can go fix. Wouldn't it be great if we can actually identify those before that claim gets sent, sit through the process of the adjudication, wait, and then find out that you've actually had a denial? We can go identify these things a priori and fix it and resend it. So we've been spending a lot of time thinking about how do we solve that. Enter the idea of predictive claim edits. We can actually go leverage our historical data, claims data that we have, remittance data that we've received and is managed by our RCM intelligence product, and then go leverage that to go identify that, hey, you may have a claim here that may need a few edits before it's actually submitted. So and this may be an ICD-10 code that's incorrectly entered, et cetera, right? We can actually flag that, have those fixed immediately, and then kind of have that sent. So obviously, there's a huge benefit. It increases the cash flow. And more importantly, perhaps, it actually reduces that administrative burden, time and money of sort of like having to process the follow-up of a claim denial. So huge value. Look for more coming on this soon. So finally, we've covered quite a bit of ground here, so I want to kind of leave you with some summaries and key takeaways. Right? As you've been hearing throughout this, and it can't be overstated, the availability of data is a massive benefit for us to get to our mission of improved patient outcomes and improved economics. But really, there's a bunch of work to be done to kind of leverage that data to get to the benefit, right? Like we need to go work on sort of creating more holistic representations of this data for our patients and populations. And it doesn't need to be said, but I'll say it. Security is job one. The criticality of security is actually higher. Security and privacy is actually higher. And so that's something that is a key focus of the Inovalon One platform. So we talked about the Inovalon application portal, a centralized place to go access all of the Inovalon applications and kind of navigate across these various apps. And a really exciting converged record review application that we've just launched, AI-driven way to go do medical record analysis, scaffolded with human expertise in order to sort of like optimize risk adjustment and also quality scoring. And finally, our improvements in the revenue cycle management, both on the front end with eligibility verification pro and with predictive claims edits on the back end. Right? How do we actually simplify the process of patients coming in, getting care, being done with the care, and the provider getting their claims through the system? So we covered a ton of data here. I hope that was useful. Really important for all of us to see that we're on the cusp of an incredibly transformative journey here with all of the data and AI that we have access to. Then hopefully you got a good sense of how we're thinking about it. I'm really excited about all of the stuff we're doing. And thank you, and hope you all have a fantastic conference. All right.